Welcome to Windows on the World. Now we talk a lot about climate and the changing climate. The country is getting colder. We're going into a very cold snap. And I'm going to ask Piers Corbyn what this has got to do with global warming. Piers.
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to say that 24 weeks ago we did predict we would have this cold snap, and it would continue through quite a lot of November and into the winter, certainly the early winter. But at the same time as this, we have more talk of mini ice age, which is something we've been putting forward for a long time. And this is coming from Russians who are saying, yes, there is definitely a mini ice age coming. Now, of course, this would cut right across the global warming story. Because although they're making up data, there's going to be a limit to how much fraud they can commit. And when we have things like ice flows appearing in north of Northern Ireland, which we fully expect will happen within the next 10 or 20 years, then of course it's going to be very difficult for them to argue this man-made climate change in terms of warming. And of course they have to prepare for this. And already we have now, and in the last few weeks there's been a sudden increase in these insane claims that cold means warm. And somehow this cold which has been experienced is going to be indirectly caused by extra carbon dioxide, which is heating something somewhere and causing something to happen. Now, of course, it is complete, utter, delusional nonsense, a pack of lies, but that is what is happening.
Well, what is happening, I've noticed, is that the rhetoric is pretty much the same from the people who are using this as their religion, in that we did a show last week which was called The Mind Virus and Climate Change,
Absolutely.
where I went into what this is about, this programming that people have, that it is a religion, you can't question it. And some of the comments underneath this are very interesting. Now we're getting people who are really onto this, and they're putting in, sometimes it's quite contrary type of opinions, but all pointing the same way. In other words, that we're being fed a pup, and this is a massive fraud. But on the other side, you've got this hysteria. And one of them even said, you're not allowed to say these things. You should be shot in the head. These kind of things. So they're not arguing science. They're coming back with threats, basically. Now, that brings me on to the latest in the COP conferences, the Marrakesh conference, the conferences of the parties, or COP22. Now, they've got some very draconian ideas of what they're going to implement, because a lot of this was set up from the Paris talks, and of course we were at the Alternative Paris event, which wasn't quite as well attended as their one. There was no limousines showing up, and there was no free
paid to be there.
There was no free buffet, was there? No, we had to go to the cafe down the road. But I would say that we had some very interesting people there. Now, the thing is that they're now talking about implementation. Now, the implementation of this is all really about mitigation, isn't it?
Yes.
It's mitigating and throwing money at something that you're saying, and I believe that isn't happening, what we're being fed, this propaganda. But what they're saying is we've got to keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, which is in their 2 degrees centigrade limit. They're saying this is a limit. Can you explain to people why they're doing this?
Yes. Well, the underlying drive actually is what they imagine is sold to people under the phrase of redistribution of wealth and taking money from the cause of the problem, which is the West, and giving it to the third world. But of course, all of these things are implemented via corporate America, essentially, and Wall Street. So any big project to save the planet is going to mean massive profits for these people. So that is the real agenda. But in terms of the propaganda, yes, they have to say the world is getting warmer and it is a dramatic problem. Now, if they fail and the world gets colder and they can't stop that, then they're going to go to the issues I mentioned earlier. But right now, they're sticking to the world is warming. And for example, they produced this propaganda, which has got a large number of names on it, including this.
Come out of the Met Office, and it's
well, yeah, but it's not just the Met Office. It's got all
the
these
Hadley Centre.
all these side organisations, National Oceanographic Centre Southampton, which does good research into oceanography, but they latch themselves onto this. Tyndall Centre, which is just a propaganda machine for climate lies, and that is this one here, which talks about a 4 degrees centigrade temperature rise. Now, this is utter nonsense. It's a complete pack of lies. It is never going to happen. But if they do any measures, they'll claim that they prevented the 4 degrees C rise by these measures. Now, what actually is going on, the real data shows that the world is cooling. And this is satellite and balloon data, which shows the world is now cooling. Their fraudulent data, which is produced by selecting weather stations and chucking out about 2/3 of them, which were operating before 1990, that data says there's been a rise of average temperatures between 2011 to 2015 of plus 0.57 degrees centigrade compared with the 1961 to 1990 average. Now, that period was a world cold period. So the rise they're getting alarmed about is not very much, and of course fits in completely with our explanation that actually they've committed fraud to the tune of 0.5 degree or thereabouts. So the data they're coming up with, which, well, if it compares with what we've compared with, it should be a bit more than 0.5 degree, because they're choosing a colder period to compare it with. So what they're doing, actually, their data verifies what we've said, namely that they're committing fraud of around 0.5 degree. And they're getting very upset at the meeting about that. And the 4 degrees C is just a complete scare story. Now, the meeting in Marrakesh, of course, is coming up with all sorts of things that have to be done.
There's 5 major points there.
Oh, well, yeah.
We've started with that, but moving on further down, it says countries can account for emission reductions themselves, but it's going to be tracked internationally, basically. So there's going to be huge pressure on countries to comply with things that they're already having trouble even saying that they might comply with. So this is very draconian implementation. The way it's worded is quite scary. It's very, very authoritarian, what they're saying. They're saying, look, there is no choice. You've got to do this. And they're doing it. We're all doing it. One world government, you know. And they want to track how everyone's implementing this. So have any of these policies actually, we know that, let's say, look, the green policies, we know these have been implemented into local authority. We go into this a lot. But this totally draconian idea of getting rid of all fossil fuels and killing off industry, how are they going to do this? Because they're saying that they want a lot of this implemented by 2018.
Yeah. It'll never happen. And the actual practical implementation of CO2 reduction is not CO2 reduction at all. It's moving of CO2 reduction from America or Britain to India and China. So it's just a redistribution of industry and a deindustrialisation of the West, and in the process of that, lowering living standards in the West and increasing profits for Wall Street. Now, of course, this is the reason why Donald Trump is so dangerous to them, because he doesn't propagate the man-made climate change story and says absolutely explicitly he wants to stop the deindustrialisation of America. This is totally contrary to the Wall Street agenda. Now, he's a rich man, of course, but that is why Julian Assange said, when interviewed by Pilger, that the ruling elite will not allow Donald Trump to win.
Well, it's interesting the way that they allow Assange to leak it out before they give us the bad news.
Of course.
So, to bring up this again, though,
any news from them, from their point of view in America, will be bad news right now, because there's such a motion against the ruling elite.
Well, I think it's quite interesting because if you get what we could, let's call it the New World Order, let's call this global government the New World Order, you know, to give it its conspiratorial
Okay.
name. Now,
Okay.
does seem to be a split even within that mob of people, not including, of course, people like Bill Gates and the Al Gores and all these people, but there is a split whether this is real or not within that global governance. Is there not?
You mean if climate change is real?
Yes.
Oh yes, absolutely. Look, they know, all the scientists know it's a pack of lies. Because look, I asked them for data and say, look, come on, Professor, you know, Brian Hoskins, could you just give us the data that shows that more CO2 has reached to world temperatures? Now, if we were talking about neutrino mass or some little esoteric question, of course he'd pop up with a scientific paper and, you know, we could discuss it. But no, he can't come up with anything at all. And none of them come up with anything at all. It is a pack of lies. And the scientists among them know it's a pack of lies. Of course, there's Greenpeace freaks around who know nothing about science, and they'll just go on pushing it, believing that somehow Western capitalism is causing bad. No, Western capitalism does many bad things, but climate change is...
They
not
do
one
take
of
it
them.
down to these arguments. That's what that show, the last show we did, the Mind Virus and Climate Change, which you can find on Windows on the World YouTube channel, which you'd be watching now if you were watching this live or later on, because we're streaming this live now. But I went into what this is really about, and what they're doing is bringing it down to childish arguments. So in other words, well, if you don't want to save the world, you're just a selfish capitalist. You know, they have to bring it down to simplicity, and this is what we see in the mainstream media. I mean, this is the people who are writing for The Guardian, they're going down to these childish arguments, which obviously the people who are controlling the newspapers are letting them do because that's good, you see. But the thing is that they're also saying now that a way forward, this is one of the last points they make, a way forward on loss and damage. So does this mean that we have to pay reparations out for the climate change that we've already let happen?
Yes, oh yes, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about handing out largesse to dictators running small islands around the world, basically, whose islands aren't threatened at all in any way whatsoever by mankind's carbon dioxide, because those islands go up and down with sea level as Darwin showed over 100 years ago. So what we're told is nonsense. But, you know, I mean, the future is going to be a hard fight because these schools are brainwashing children. And in fact, these things are there to brainwash. However, you see, schools do basically encourage children to think as well. And the same with students. So more and more we're going to have a big contradiction between
Piers?
people's trained criticisms and what they're told they must think.
I thought I was brainwashed in school until I saw the brainwashing that's going on now. So if you're in school, don't be brainwashed, but do get educated. That's it from Windows on the World, and we'll see you very soon.